Thanks for joining me again in this lesson where we're going to talk about AWS CloudFront. So let's go ahead and talk about the features and benefits that AWS CloudFront offers. Let's get started. So what is CloudFront? CloudFront is the content delivery network service from AWS. And that just means that this service will be caching the content into what's called as an edge location. Let's talk about it more in detail. Let's say you got your web server somewhere located on the east coast of United States. And now your business grows so much that you got your audience everywhere around the world. You got people in the Middle East accessing your website. You got people in Asia and of course in the United States and maybe few sets of people in the European region. When the audience at that scale accesses your web application, there are chances that the audience will complain about the latency that they get while accessing the web application. When you use CDN along with your web application, you're just saying that let me cache my content all across the world. So the content that the customers are trying to access will be cached in the nearest edge location. What do you see the benefit would be then? Well, the benefit would be that the customers can then access the content more quickly. So every time you access a website which has a global presence, there is a probability, there is a chance that they are using some sort of content delivery network. Traditionally, there have been several content delivery networks, and Akamai as a company is one of the most famous content delivery network. With AWS, we just say that, hey, you do not have to go to that third party. We are a one-stop shop. If you can host websites here, you can cache content too. So we can leverage the edge locations of Amazon to host the cache. The CloudFront edge locations provide fast access to the content, and that content can be in any form. It could be data, it could be videos, applications, and APIs. The advantage is that it replicates the data to various points that are in different places around the world. And this just helps ensure that customers do not experience a latency when they're trying to access the data. So your customers will not complain about being tired of waiting for that website to load. And if that ever occurs, customers will just go to a different website and you will lose your business. Now, you don't want to lose your website visitors, so that's where CloudFront comes to your rescue in the form of content delivery network to cache the content. So what that does is that the user goes to access the data. It pulls that data from the origin, in this case, let's say East Coast of United States, which is where the source server is, and then it loads it into the CloudFront edge location that's closest to the user. So if the user is somewhere in Australia, then that content will be cached at that location. So next time someone from that region tries to access the data, they reach that CloudFront edge location and the website then loads up from there. And of course, it's going to be quick this time because it's not doing multiple round trips to the source location. Amazon calls these edge locations also as point of presence. So if you recall one of the lessons in the first module, we did see when we are talking about availability zones, regions, we did mention about edge locations that are used for caching the content. The security professionals will be worried about data spanning across geographies and also the probability of DDoS attacks. Now, if you're wondering what DDoS attack is, well, DDoS is distributed denial of service. In a DDoS attack, there are typically thousands of compromised servers, and they could be located anywhere. Those computers attempt to overload a particular server. So there's so much of traffic that's hit to the server that any genuine traffic will not be allowed to access the genuine content. So it will be extremely slow to access, and you'll be losing all your genuine customers. So DDoS attacks a lot of times target DNS, the DNS servers, the web servers, and application servers as well. It really doesn't matter. The end goal is just to crash that system and thereby preventing the people to access the web application or the data that they're trying to access. So why are we talking about DDoS and security when we're talking about CloudFront? How does CloudFront help there? Well, that is because the data is being replicated to all of those points of presence as a compromised computer attempts to access the source server. So they are actually redirected to one of the CloudFront edge locations because these locations are distributed worldwide. So CloudFront is actually minimizing the potential of a DDoS attack because instead of being sent to the source server, the malicious guy is sent to the CloudFront point of presence. So the source server is never impacted. By using CloudFront, it's just not the files that are distributed, but also the attack surface is also distributed worldwide. If you do not use CDN, you can imagine what's going to happen. The DDoS attack will be targeted towards that individual web server. So what is CloudFront? Well, CloudFront is a global content delivery network. It's going to help you deliver your data, your videos, applications, and the API that you need to your viewers, ensuring the lowest latency and high transfer speed just to keep your customers happy. CloudFront is very well integrated with AWS. And you saw all of those points of presence that are everywhere, all across the geography. And we can see that in the AWS global infrastructure. CloudFront integrates very well with a service called as AWS Shield. Now, AWS Shield is about DDoS mitigation, okay? Just remember that it's one of the security service. So AWS Shield is there to help you mitigate the DDoS attacks that we were just talking about. All AWS customers, regardless of paid or free trial or enterprise, they are protected by the basic version of AWS Shield for free. And of course, there's an advanced version of AWS Shield, and you get lots of other features along with the advanced version, and there's an additional cost involved in that. Now, I know we did digress when talking about CloudFront. We're going to take a step back and talk about CloudFront now, but my point was that CloudFront integrates very well with AWS Shield and other services like S3, where you're going to host your static websites, or maybe Elastic Load Balancer that is connected to your EC2 instances. And these services can be used as origins for your application. We're going to talk about AWS Lambda a little bit later, but then I thought I'll bring this point into this discussion as well because AWS CloudFront does integrate with AWS Lambda, which is a serverless part of AWS. So just to give you a gist of what AWS Lambda is, now Lambda gives you the ability to run your custom code without requiring a physical server, right? So traditionally, if you ever had to run your custom code, what you have to do? Well, you have to then spin up a server, virtual or physical, doesn't matter, and then install the operating system, make sure that you got all kinds of server hardening procedures on it, and then finally get your code. With AWS Lambda, you start top down. You start with your code and not with the server. What happens with that then? Well, you save a lot of time, isn't it? You will have no physical server or a virtual server to manage your code, right? So the developers can just go ahead and start pushing their code instead of asking the system administrators to spin up a server. We're going to talk about AWS Lambda a little bit later, but then again, I want to mention that CloudFront integrates with AWS Lambda as well, right? At this point, I want to take a step back and then just to refresh our concepts, right? Let's talk about how does all of this work. Let's break it down. Now, when a user tries to access the data, that means user is trying to load up the website or something, let's say the cloudmentor.com or something, right? So when the user searches for the cloudmentor.com, they are directed to Route 53 or some kind of a DNS name resolution service. In this case, you will have your domain registered in Route 53 with this name. So within Route 53, we have an alias record that's set to one of the CloudFront edge locations. So the first thing CloudFront does is to check if the data is actually cached at that location. If it is, then the data is immediately returned back to the user. If the data is not cached, what's going to happen? If the data is not cached at the edge location, then it has to go to the CloudFront origin to access the data. And that origin can be your Elastic Load Balancer, your EC2 instance, your S3 bucket, or your Lambda. And all of those can serve as a CloudFront origin. So let's say it's a Elastic Load Balancer, right? So the Elastic Load Balancer can still distribute the workload amongst the EC2 instances. And then that data is returned back to the edge location, right? The data stays on the edge location for a certain duration of time. it cannot sit there forever, isn't it? Because the developers are working on the code, the developers are updating the website, and that updated code is going to your EC2 instance or your S3 bucket. And what's going to happen if the content is sitting there on your edge location for a long time? The users will not be getting the updated content. And that's why there must be a time to live, a TTL, an expiration date for that cached content on that edge location. So when that expires, it is automatically removed from the edge location. And the next time someone goes to access the data, it has to go back to the origin and return that data back to the cloud front on an edge location. So when the data is sent to the edge location, as soon as the first byte of data hits the edge location, then it is sent back to our customer's computer. So that is about CloudFront. CloudFront is there to help you minimize the round trips back and forth to the origin server. That's point one. It is caching the content. That's point two. And with all of those above points, it is reducing the latency to the end user. And point four, of course, it is making the customer happy, right? So that's all for now, folks. In this lesson, we learned about CloudFront and how that integrates with other services in AWS, and of course, all the benefits that CloudFront has to offer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.